Dan, this is a space that you've been following very closely. In a lot of the allegations we saw made from the FTC transpired in that big hearing over the summer, where we saw Mark Zuckerberg go before Congress, essentially talking about that acquisition of Instagram as well as WhatsApp, and whether it was in fact done to stifle competition.
Yeah, this is something that's been obviously in the works for some time. The investigation into Facebook was ongoing, and we saw the two groups come out yesterday and file suit against them. One was the 48 attorneys general filing suit, and then the FTC filing its own suit. What's interesting, though, is the FTC explicitly states in their kind of piece that they want to see Facebook divest WhatsApp and Instagram. Now, the interesting part of this is that it was the FTC that originally allowed Facebook to purchase both of those organizations. So it's not as though the FTC was unaware of this at all. They were the organization or the commission that allowed those moves to go forward. And so it looks as though this may be a bigger issue for Facebook than Google's suit is for itself, only because the FTC is explicitly stating that. But as any expert that we've talked to so far has mentioned, it's unlikely that we'll see any of these big tech companies broken up in the long run. There'll probably be some kind of remediative effort to ensure that they don't partake in the same business practices that they've been following, that obviously the government is not exactly happy with.
Okay, Dan, stay right there, because we've got Sally Hubbard joining us. She is the Director of Strategy of Open Markets Institute. And Sally, you heard Dan there just lay out the case that was put before Facebook yesterday by the FTC as well as the state attorneys general. We're talking about two different lawsuits, but the one from the FTC certainly getting a lot of attention because it seems to go an extra step further, calling for a divestment, an unwind of that WhatsApp deal as well as the Instagram deal. How strong is that case, you think?
Right. So the states also call for the divestiture. So both agencies are calling, both enforcers are calling for divestiture. I think the case is incredibly strong. It's not just that, these acquisitions were illegal at the time that they were committed, under the Clayton Act, but they're also part of a pattern, what the states call a buy or bury strategy, that included buying not just Instagram and WhatsApp, but a whole other slew of other companies that Facebook viewed as competitive threats. And when it couldn't buy a company, often just stopping competition from ever happening by threatening to deny access to the Facebook Friends API. So I think the cases are incredibly strong. I've personally been advocating for this exact case for many years now. And I'm very excited that the states and the FTC are finally taking action.
I mean, when we talk about that Instagram acquisition, they're going to have to show that it was illegal, which we've heard from Mark Zuckerberg before in these hearings. Why that's going to be difficult. He's pointed to the FTC's own vote when that case was brought out, and the FTC vote was unanimous, 5-0 approving it. So how hard is it going to be to go back in retrospect and say, no, actually, it wasn't legal, and how hard is it going to be to prove that?
Well, first of all, there is no time limitation on the Clayton Act, and whenever you're looking at a merger, it's necessarily a prospective exercise. So the fact that the FTC didn't currently have the evidence in front of it that the deal was illegal doesn't bar it from later unwinding the deal when that evidence becomes abundantly clear, as it has now. But also, like I said, this is part of a Sherman Act Section 2 violation, which is a monopolization claim that shows a pattern of acquisition and burying of competitors. The other thing that's important to note is that Facebook was fined by the European Commission for deceiving them when it cleared the WhatsApp deal. The states include in their complaint allegations that Facebook did the same thing in the US, deceiving enforcers about its ability and its intentions to combine the data with WhatsApp and Facebook. So it's a little bit hard for me to accept an argument that Facebook is basically saying, enforcers, you should have known that we were deceiving you back then when you first cleared that deal.
Sally, I want to ask, as far as what they're seeking in terms of the APIs and allowing third-party developers to kind of have greater access to Facebook's data, I guess, how does that then impact the fines that Facebook had seen as a result of user data going kind of out of control, how will they then prevent that from happening again if they're opening up these APIs or forced to open up these APIs?
Yeah, so Facebook loves to use privacy as an excuse for monopolization. There's lots of internal documents showing it cutting off competitors and saying we're going to make privacy be a pretext for this. But the two are actually not incompatible. They do need to be, it does need to be done in a secure way, and consumers need to be in the driving seat so that they control what data is shared. But it is not actually an incompatible thing to have interconnection. And also have privacy. It's just a matter of requiring transparency and requiring consumers to be the ones in control.
Sally, walk me through the timeline here. What are the next steps we can expect? And, to the point that we've heard so many analysts say, this is something that's going to take a very long time. It's not an overnight process. How much longer do you anticipate this moving forward?
Right. Yes. Antitrust cases are not known for being quick, unfortunately. So this could last for a year or two, even 3 years. Hopefully it'll come sooner given, the urgency of these issues. That's why I encourage the Congress to still act on the recommendations that are in the House Judiciary Antitrust Subcommittee's report and start making congressional reforms that can address some of these issues in the short term as we wait for this case to make its way through the courts.
Sally, just to kind of go through what we're seeing here is the Facebook issue and then the Google issue. Is the Facebook issue a greater threat to that company existentially than the Google suit is to Google? Because they're asking for some kind of structural changes to Google, but they're not explicitly stating a divestiture of something like Google Ads or something along those lines. So is one a bigger threat than the other?
Well, the one thing to remember about the Google case is that what we've just seen are the first shots that are fired, and we're expecting more cases to come along from the state AGs who are looking at other aspects of Google's search and other aspects of Google's monopoly in the ad tech ecosystem. So we're really only looking at a sliver of what's to come. They are seeking structural relief. I think we've learned from Europe that behavioral conditions that are not structural don't work. Largely all of Europe's remedies against Google have failed, despite them being pioneering and bringing those cases. So I think enforcers will be looking for structural remedies. And we're only seeing a small part of what Google is going to see in the future. Facebook certainly, having actual competition, having, Instagram or WhatsApp as viable alternatives for consumers would be a big deal. It hasn't had constraint. And, I think, the problems that it's faced in terms of amplifying disinformation and recruiting people to extremist groups, invading users' privacy. These are all quality dimensions that it'll have much more pressure to fix if it actually has viable substitutes for most of its users out there on the market.
Yeah, for the time being, investors not seemingly reacting by the same margin we saw even earlier this year when it was hit off that ad boycott. So we'll see what happens with the case here. But Sally Hubbard, Open Markets Institute Director of Enforcement Strategy, appreciate you coming on here to chat.
Thanks for having me.